All right, everybody, thank you for coming. We're recording this online, so if you don't consent to your face being recorded, just do this the whole presentation. I'm Carl Brooker. I'm somebody who has a hard time with Saturdays versus Tuesdays on calendar invites, so I appreciate everyone's patience. I'm the membership coordinator at the PSRM right now. So I don't want to delay any longer than we need to. I appreciate everybody coming out. As membership coordinator, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask everybody to spend more time on the railroad. We're looking for volunteers, always looking for volunteers, everybody knows. And you don't have to be at Campo to do it. We need folks out here helping at the La Mesa Depot. Bruce needs help with museum or with library items that can be done from home. Stephen has 4 banker's boxes of who knows what that he's digging through. So there, many hands make light the work, so everybody's invited to participate. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Museum President Stephen Hager. I think we got a couple questions from the audience. If anybody online during this lecture as well has questions or wants to participate, you can type in the chat and we'll read those out for Bruce or Stephen. So take it away, Stephen.
All right, thank you, Carl. So I thank you all for coming tonight. It's great to see that we had such a good turnout, especially in person. I didn't really have a prepared speech for tonight, but we did get one question that came in that I know many are curious about, and that is, where are we in terms of getting the railroad reopened in either direction from where we operate now? So for those who don't know the background on this, current operating segment on the railroad is from Campo to a location that we call Canyon, which is just over 4 miles west of Campo. There's another 1.5 miles west of Campo to Division, which is the location of the international border. That's our typical Western operating limit that we're entitled to for our operating agreement with the Metropolitan Transit System. East from Campo, we have 8 miles to a siding called Miller Creek, and that's where museum trains first started running when the museum opened to the public in 1986. So why don't we run from Division to Miller Creek right now? It's a long story. The museum started losing trackage back in the mid-2000s. Just east of Campo, there's a trestle over a very small wash called Cow Creek, which is completely dry 364 days out of the year, but flows maybe 1 day a year, and every 100 years we get a storm event that floods the Campo Valley, and it has to be able to flow through that creek. So the reason we can't get over that bridge is because it's an old wooden trestle, and just due to age and lack of maintenance, it degraded to the point where it was no longer safe to operate trains over. It's been inspected in the last 15 years. We know that it has at least one bad stringer, which is the main longitudinal structural element of the bridge. And we know that the western abutment on the bridge is failing and starting to collapse. So in its current state, the bridge is not safe to operate trains over. So that's why we're not running east of it. West from Campo, it was a combination of things. As you know, we used to run trains into Tecate, Mexico, and even as far as Garcia once a year. That stopped in late 2009 when Tunnel 3, which is just south of the US-Mexico border, caught fire. And being that it was a soft earth tunnel with a timber lining, once that lining was gone, the entire tunnel just caved in. It was dug out by ADMI Carga, which is the quasi-government agency in Baja, California that oversees that rail line, in 2016. Unfortunately, when they did that, they cut the slopes too steep. So the next time there was a major rainstorm, another landslide occurred through that tunnel. And having been there about 2 years ago, I estimate that it's about 30,000 cubic yards of material that came down on the track. We had a contractor in Mexico take a look at what it would take to dig that tunnel back out. And they quoted $308,000 as of 2 years ago. So there's obviously the financial challenge of us taking that project on, but there's also the logistical challenge being that it's in another country. You really have to get buy-off from the government down there and all the stakeholders on the railroad. And to date, we just haven't been able to get enough movement on that. It's something we're interested in continuing to pursue. We do have members within the museum who have ties to the state and local governments in Baja California. So hopefully, as we continue to try to foster some relationships down south, that will lead to more cooperation from the governments, which hopefully leads to some funding to get that tunnel repaired. We get asked about our trains to Ducati very regularly. I think anyone who volunteers at Campo can attest that they field questions about that on a regular basis. So it's not something we've lost interest in. We definitely still want to look into it. It's just going to take time. Now that explains why we're not going into Mexico right now. The last mile and a half between Canyon and Division was, it's been our terminus now for about 5 years. The reason for that is that about 10 years ago, the Federal Railroad Administration enacted new regulations on bridge inspections and load ratings. So they said every single railroad bridge needs to have an engineering study done on it to determine the safe load that it can carry, and it needs to have annual inspections done on it. At that time, we decided that the 2 bridges west of Canyon would just be too much of an investment for us. So we decided to just keep the bridge west of Campo open and operating so that we could at least get our trains down to Canyon, which, being that it has road access, is a natural turning point for the railroad. Well, about 2 years ago, when we were pretty deep into the project to acquire that coaster locomotive, part of the trade-off that we got with the North County Transit District was that they would give us money to get those 2 bridges inspected for that year and load rated, which is good as a one-time engineering study. It's good forever. So that's what we did. We got those bridges load rated. We got the annual inspections done. The only thing stopping us from getting back to Division now is the need to do a more comprehensive track inspection down that way, and most likely do a few hundred tie replacements, just because it hasn't been run in so many years. So if you want to take that as a call to action, we need more people to help with our track work. Our maintenance of way department is a very small crew of dedicated people. They get as much work done as they can with the time they have available, but they're always looking for more help. So if that's something that you're personally interested in, or you know somebody who might be interested in coming out and doing some hard labor on the track, it's tough work, but it's really rewarding, especially when you can say that you've opened up more of the railroad. So that's our plan getting back west. As soon as we can get that track to a state where it's safe to run over, we'll be getting trains back to Division, continuing to look into the future to getting back down to Mexico. Going east, the approach we're taking at this point is we're planning to remove that trestle completely and replace it with a culvert and an earthen berm. That way we don't have to deal with the annual inspections on an old wooden trestle. We'll just get it taken care of once and for all, put some large culverts in, then we can start doing track work east from Campo to get us back to Miller Creek. It's a similar story to going west to Division. It's just going to take time, labor, and money to get the railroad reopened. So any way that you may be able to contribute to that, whether you want to donate towards maintenance of way expenses, or if you want to come out and work on the track, those are all little baby steps that we need to take in order to get more of the railroad reopened. Yes, sir.
Steve, do you have a price on the culvert?
Well, yes and no. We know roughly how much earthwork it's going to take because it's about a 50-foot long span. The berm is about 50 feet wide at its base. So that's probably less than $50,000 in earthwork by the time you mobilize equipment out to do it. The culverts, I don't know how much those will cost yet. We still have to size the culverts for whatever the maximum flow might be right there. We're getting some pro bono engineering work done on it, so it's not moving as fast as it could. But I'm hopeful that we'll get some traction on that in the next 6 months or so.
Is MTS on board with that?
They are actually. Good question. MTS sees it as a beneficial thing for them if our museum is operating over more of the railroad. Because right now, the San Diego and Arizona Eastern is a 70-mile piece of liability for them. And as they see it, the more railroad that we're keeping an eye on and maintaining and operating over and discouraging trespassing on, the less liability they have out there in East County where they don't have enough manpower to keep an eye on it. So they are on board with this. And they've actually said that if we can get some hard costs put together for that trestle, they will try to chip in some money because they do have money put away specifically for the SD&AE, which they collect through permits, leases, and whatnot. So there is help on the way, as long as we can get our engineering work done. Rob? Does anyone have any other questions before we kick off the main event here? Yes, Jim.
There's a question in the chat.
All right. Let's see. Is there an online list of volunteer jobs? Right now, what we have on the website is a basic breakdown of the different departments of the museum. Those are the operations department, museum services department, tourism department, and equipment department. And it gives a basic breakdown of the tasks in each department, basic things that get done by each department. If you're looking for a detailed list of needs, the best way to learn about that is to reach out to us through the volunteer email, and you'll get directed to the right person within the organization who can give you more information on our needs at the museum. We do also have an online calendar on the website, which we try to keep updated with upcoming volunteer work days. So that is another way to keep an eye on upcoming events that we have taking place.
And the article.
Yes, and next edition of the Hot Scoop, not this month, but next month, is going to have a lot more information on volunteering opportunities at the museum. Ready to kick it off here?
Yeah.
All right, well, on to the main event then. I'm going to turn it over to PSRM archivist, Bruce Semelsberger, who's going to tell you about the South Bay Railroad tonight. Woo!
All right, disclaimer before I get started here. There are several books that have been written about some of the individual railroads in South Bay, various facets of South Bay. We're going to try in our roughly 1 hour here to give you a broad picture of how it all got started and go up into, let's say, the 1920s. I'm not going to try to bring it all the way up. I think most of you are familiar with the more recent happenings and status of what's happening down in the South Bay. So again, it's kind of a broad approach here. I'm not going to cover depots and buildings. That's another whole talk. We'll see where we wind up here. If you would hold your questions till the end, I would appreciate it. And we'll have a Q&A period for you, and I'll try and answer anything that you come up with. I'm sure you'll come up with some. All right. So, in chronological order, this is what we're going to talk about. And I imagine most of you didn't know there were that many railroad companies associated with the South Bay here in San Diego. Starting off with the California Southern that opened everything up with our connection to the outside. We're going to talk about the Coronado Beach Railroad, Coronado Railroad, National City and Otay, the streetcar company that left the Works narrow gauge railroad, San Diego and Phoenix, you most have never heard about. San Diego Electric, of course, the trolley company. Then we'll get into the SD&A, the SD&AE, not really. Right. San Diego Southern. San Diego Southern Railway, the Mexico and San Diego Railway, and the San Diego and Southeastern. We got a pretty good plate to fill here. California Southern, those of you who were here last time got a good dose of California Southern. Chartered in 1880, by the directors of the Santa Fe Railroad and the Kimball brothers, who owned pretty much the entire South Bay, the Rancho de la Nacion. As a result of that charter, the agreement gave the railroad subsidies to start building to San Diego, $25,000 in cash, which was a lot of money in today's terms. But mostly what you're going to be concerned with is the 17,355 acres of land. We needed some of the land, obviously, for railroad right of way. They needed a lot of the land for the railroad yard and the shop facilities. The agreement said that as long as the California Southern stayed in business, the terminus of the Santa Fe system would be a national city, and all of the work would get done in this yard. So they built this. It was the largest railroad yard in California, and was located right there south of 24th Street, where the present Santa Fe, much smaller yard, is now. Building the railroad turned out to be as difficult as everybody thought it would, mostly because of problems with the Southern Pacific, who didn't take kindly to competition. Routing, again, trying to stay away from Southern Pacific. They ran the line up Santa Margarita River Valley. And they knew, mostly because of the second chief engineer, Fred Paris, who was a California boy, that valley drained the entire Temecula Basin. So if a major flood came away, they were in big trouble. They were counting on the fact that, well, okay, 100-year floods. Well, 1884 ended that. They managed to rebuild the railroad, put the Chinese back to work, and finally got the line all the way through to meet the Atlantic and Pacific, which was jointly owned by the Frisco and the Santa Fe at Needles, California. So the railroad was completed. And in San Diego, they had a huge celebration of exhibits and department store windows, lambasting Los Angeles. Take that. Attitude. And the San Francisco Post reported the longest line of railroad in the world under one management has reached National City. National City? Where's that? I thought this railroad was going to San Diego. So much for National City. Same newspaper predicted it would be followed by a big boom. The way things had been going all the way across the country as the transcontinentals came, and sure enough, that's exactly what was going to happen here. The rate war between Southern Pacific and Santa Fe peaked in 1887. Fare dropped down to $1 from the Mississippi River, and the boom was on. What do we mean by a boom? Let's talk about that for a second here. Literally, there were promoters who followed railroad building across the country. People who bought up real estate cheap, hopefully before the railroad got there, guessing where the railroad was going to go, sold it for a lot more money when the railroad got there. And they had lots of tricks to sell real estate. And one of them was parades. So when these guys were in town, they would stage a big parade, and the first thing you would hear in the morning, everybody sleeping in their hotel room would be woken up by the big bass drum coming down the street. Get on your walking shoes, get on the railroad, get down here to where we're having this big real estate auction. You just don't want to miss this. Boom, boom, boom. That was the whole idea. That's why they called them boomers, not to be confused with railroad boomers and other old. Noisy deal. Among the boomtown projects, you had people that had come to San Diego not long after Father Hort opened up New San Diego. Two of them, Elisha Babcock and Hampton Story, both had a pretty large amount of money from what they had done other places. Hampton Story had a huge business building pipe organs, among other things, back in Illinois. Wound up in Coronado, which was a peninsula of San Diego full of sagebrush and rabbits, for the most part. And they saw that there was hope to do something major with that. So they came out here, they got together, they held large scale hunts, rabbit hunts. We're going to go out and hunt rabbits today. You can get all the rabbits, you can keep all the rabbits you get, and have rabbit stew for 2 weeks. So they staged all these massive hunting, and they got rid of most of the rabbits. They cut down a lot of the sagebrush, and it started looking like maybe actual real estate. They announced plans in the paper. They're going to build a major hotel there on the island. They're going to have ferry boat service coming to the island, and you called it an island, even though it's really a peninsula. They would eventually fill in the 2 bights that almost bisected the island in places, the Spanish Bight and the Whalers Bight. At the same time, all that 13,485 acres of real estate acquired by the Santa Fe, and there was a California law that said a railroad could not be in the real estate business, so they chartered a separate company, the San Diego Land and Town in Kansas, to take over all of that territory that they had inherited. And of course, all the roads are dirt, and a lot of them are not even a road to get up a lot of that property. So if you're going to sell it to people and you want to bring people out to see it, you've got to have some way to get them there, and that means a railroad. So they got President Dickerson of the Santa Fe to apply for a railroad franchise through the National Ranch, and they announced plans to build a dam so there would be water for irrigation and farming, and they would also have this railroad connect with several rail lines that were being planned in Mexico. The Peninsular Railroad was one that was already under construction from Ensenada up to Tijuana. They only got 10 miles of it built and flooded it out. They never finished it. Another project called the B Line would have had a railroad run from Tijuana almost directly east through Mexico and tie into the Santa Fe and the Southern Pacific at the other end of the Mexican country. Western Salt Company replaced the old La Punta Salt Works. People got the idea pretty early that you could drain some of the swamp down there, build evaporating ponds, and start evaporating seawater and getting salt. So the small works that were there were purchased by Elisha Babcock, and he established the Western Salt Company, which greatly expanded the ability to mine salt down there. After the boom was technically over, we still had projects going on. San Diego and Phoenix, you're going to hear about later. Tony Carlson, one of my favorite characters from the boom period in San Diego. Amazing man. All the gall in the world. San Diego Electric Railway Company directly came from John Spreckles, who had come to San Diego back in 1887. Kind of got right into things with the war, had a coal bunker to supply everybody with coal from Australia. Took a look at the horse car system, which was pretty pathetic, and decided that it really needed to be updated. San Diego and Arizona, as you see here, between John Spreckles and the Southern Pacific, they determined to build that line very late in the system, 1906. Didn't actually get going until 1907. San Diego Southern is a consolidation by Spreckles of 2 of the earlier railroads. You're going to hear a lot more about that. San Diego and Southeastern is a still later consolidation that includes the line going east out of San Diego, which is now the East Line Trolley. And finally, the San Diego and Arizona, most of you are pretty familiar with. Since the museum owns the rights to the name. Spreckles and Harriman together with most of the money coming from Harriman, assumed the assets of a previous project, which we have some of their memorabilia in our library. Marston Company, San Diego Eastern. They also probably inherited at least one franchise in Mexico. And the San Diego Southeastern, as you'll see later, also had the ability to go into Mexico. So that's the last biggie that you're going to run into. Okay, starting off with what actually transpired. Coronado Railroad was two components. Coronado Beach Railroad was incorporated just to get people from the ferry landing down to the planned hotel, and was later expanded a little ways further south. Standard gauge, 30-pound rail, means every 3 feet of rail weighs 30 pounds. Ran right down the middle of Orange Avenue. If you always wondered why Orange Avenue has that big old land right in the middle of it, separating the north and south, that's why that had the trolley line right down the middle of it. First locomotive shipped from Philadelphia. Pretty much everything was being done by from the Eastern Railroad companies at this point in time. San Francisco was just getting into the locomotive building game. 8 flat cars arrived for doing construction. The ferry boat Coronado, which was a fairly small ferry and had to make a whole lot of trips to get people over there, arrived by November of that year. 2 new coaches came in the following spring, and the railroad was in business. These are small coaches. There you go. We had open air to start with, and then enough people complained, I guess, when winter came around and they had to buy closed coaches as well. The typical motor, as they called them at the time, is the steam dummy. These were typically either bought out of Vulcan Ironworks up in San Francisco, or in the case of this one, Philadelphia. Just a really basic little steam engine enclosed in a box cab, with the theory that it looked like something horses were familiar with, so it wouldn't scare horses. They didn't account much, apparently, for the smoke and the sparks and the noise. And they really did scare horses. And the promised hotel, obviously, was going to make everything work on Coronado. They had problems initially getting water out there. And like I said, they just chased away the jackrabbits. So you got to have something to attract people if you're really going to make anything out of it. And on March 12th of 1887, they had done the foundation. May, everybody was at work, 250 men, everybody they could get in San Diego that could swing a hammer was hired to build this hotel. It had no formal blueprint. They had a general idea. We want this to look like this and have this many rooms and be 80 feet high. So they drew up this general plan. They got the lumber and they turned them loose. The guys who knew how to do taught the people that didn't. So it was a great job training, apparently. And it attracted a lot of sightseers and land investors. And they saw something was actually going to happen here. They actually got a pretty fair amount of money out of the ferry company just bringing people over there to look at wanting to build this hotel. Meanwhile, they got the second locomotive, more substantial, and a double-decker car. There were, I guess, 5 of them in San Diego at one point, like you see on the streets in London as buses. They just had all double-decker cars. You'd think they would just blow over in a wind, but apparently they weren't. They got 800 tons of rail, and everything, of course, had to come into San Diego from the sea. Even though the Santa Fe system was open, it was much cheaper and really bulk cargo like this to bring everything bound to South America corn on a ship. So ships were making a big deal out of our bay here. And the ferry was making 80 trips a day. Like I said, it's a fairly small ferry, and right away they decided they're going to have to get something bigger. There's the hotel nearing completion. There's a lot more to it today. Added more. But you look at this thing, this always just totally amazes me that this thing was built by unskilled labor and it's still around over 100 years later. Incredible. You see a powerhouse in the foreground here. The hotel was equipped with electricity by Thomas Edison. First one on the West Coast to do that. They had a complete laundry, they had boathouse and a bathhouse. All the amenities. Then the second phase got going when the hotel was ready to open. The Coronado Belt Line, as it's most commonly known today, would circle the entire bay. Along the way, picked up a lot of businesses, including Western Salt. There was a brickyard at the foot of the Strand that turned out 10,000 bricks a day. Pretty amazing. I don't know what they made them out of. I can't imagine there's a lot of clay over there. Brickyard worked well. They had an iron foundry that actually worked, and they built the first large shipbuilding and repair facility on Coronado. And it's probably a little bit hard to see on the map, but starting in downtown San Diego, I didn't put this out here. At 5th and L, San Diego, it came over here to the Choyas Valley, then it dropped down the valley, 24th Street, National City, where they built some shops, then all the way around the bay, up the east side of the Strand, then around Coronado to the ferry landing. Then they cut over to North Island, which would later be inhabited by originally the United States Army Rockwell Field, first aviation facility out here. They had to get across those bikes that I mentioned. They hadn't filled them in yet, so they had to build trestle bridges across there. So here's locomotive number 2, obviously a lot more substantial and capable of hauling either freight or passenger trains all the way around the day. Typical 440 California tank. Ferry landing that was built, matching construction. This building at the ferry landing looks almost identical with the boathouse at the Hotel Del, all built by the same people. You see the Coronado Beach Railroad down here in the foreground, getting ready to haul people from the ferry boat that has come in. This is the second ferry boat, the Silvergate, much larger boat, but very unwieldy. They had a lot of problems with it. Kept running into accidents, almost demolished one of the wharfs. Not very navigable. More typical of the locomotives that the Coronado Railroad would acquire are these locomotives, either 042s or 062 wheel configuration locomotives. So no little wheels in the front, 4 or 6 driving wheels and 2 little wheels in the back to support the cab. Called a 40 type locomotive after the guy that designed them. They were all saddle tanks, all coal. Everything was coal up until
looks like it.
Quite a bit later. Wooden cab. The cabs were prone to catch fire.
Good.
Hitting a coal-fired locomotive, if they got a few embers on the floor and nobody didn't notice it, during the whole cab up.
Is that a salt hill behind the engine? Up by the salt works, maybe?
Not sure where that building is. I don't think it's software. It's substantial for anything I recall seeing in photographs there. Probably on Coronado.
Or roof of the boathouse or something, maybe. Huh?
Yeah, it's one of those more substantial buildings near the hotel. Okay, simultaneously with all that's going on in Coronado, San Diego Land and Town Company is busy. They appointed a superintendent, Colonel William Green Dickinson. He built a magnificent house out at the end of 24th Street, which is still there, with the beautiful Victorians. And needed to market all that land, as we said, so plans were drawn up for the dam across the Sweetwater River, the first narrow gorge, and the railroad. They would bring this line all the way down to the Mexican border at a certain point, where it was supposed to meet one of those Mexican railroads. And here again, you see both of the railroads started at the same place, roughly 5th and L in San Diego, and took slightly different approaches for getting out there. This one, in its first iteration, came out, I think, 9th Street to a certain point, then ducked down. And within about a year, they had switched over to National Avenue, went down on a slant. Then after another year, that was changed to Newton Street, and it wound up Newton Street for a long period of time. So came down Newton, came over a little bit, down the Choice Valley, and at this point, the two railroads crossed each other. Coronado line had come out and gone down 31st Street. The two met. And at later points, they tended to stage races between the two locomotives headed southbound to see who could get to the intersection first. And then that line came down again to 24th Street and then out to the end of 24th Street. See a curve out there. The street actually follows where the railroad curved around, comes down what's now the end of the National City Golf Course. At this point, you have Sweetwater Junction. That's very close to where Plaza Bonita now sits. And it crossed the river for the branch up the Sweetwater Valley, basically followed the river all the way up to La Presa, where the other branch came south through what's now the KO campground, up the hill onto 2nd Street, over to 3rd Street, Chula Vista, right down the middle of 3rd Street, Chula Vista to Otay. Then at Otay, it ducked over, made a connection with the Coronado line, then followed what's now San Isidro Boulevard, all the way down to the border. October 1886, they got everything going, they made the formal survey, signed the contract, incorporated on the 29th of December, 1887, away we go. The railroad company applied for a franchise from the County Board of Supervisors. The district attorney told them they had no power to grant franchises, and the next day they granted the franchise. Like politicians today. Grading began at 5th and L, and 13th Street on L. Then on the 12th, we started laying ties. Things progressed very rapidly in the 1880s. Again, you had no paperwork to fill out virtually. If you had the property, talk to the guy that owns it. Hey, you want to sell that lot? Sure, ain't nothing else going on. Okay, give them a contract, and here you go. 13 miles south toward National City by April 12th. Imagine getting a railroad built like that today. 1 month, 13 miles. Locomotives that they had on order from San Francisco were delayed in getting there. There were a lot of delays. San Francisco had a hard time getting their railroad building business going. huge fire at one point up there, burned up a lot of equipment that was set to go ship out. Anyway, they got started on the dam by excavating rock. They used some of the rock for concrete to build the dam. They had a Portland cement company established up in Habul. Used a lot of their cement. It would be the highest of its type, the standard horseshoe type. Let's see a picture of it a little bit. Got the flat cars, put signs on the flat cars, used those to haul rock. The rock was hauled from the site of the dam up to 24th Street. And then they had a siding out at the end of 24th Street, a spur actually. And they little engines of the railroad, the double head, sometimes take a few carloads up there, park them out there on the spur. When they accumulated enough cars, Santa Fe would send an engine out 24th Street to pick them all up and haul them back. The ones they didn't use to build the dam were hauled up to Ballast Point to build the Zuniga Jetty to protect harbor. We also got rock for the harbor from the quarry out at Foster. Got in on the Cuyamaca. And on June 15th, line officially opened from San Diego to 24th Street, 28-minute trip going down, 30 minutes going back. Cost 5 cents to go from the 5th and L out to the San Diego city limit, 10 cents to go down to National City. And the railroad company officially sold the land and town company, but they really kept their oar in as far as running the railroad business. There's the quarry at Sweetwater. Got started. Ran 2 tracks down in there. You'll see it on a map later. Have a big old typical crane at the top for loading everything. You just had 2 big old poles and cables that connected everything. Lower one of them down. Mid-June, the railroad was carrying 500 passengers a day. That's respectable. A little bit like that. And the first locomotive breakdown occurred on. It didn't take long. These little locomotives were very prone to do that. New passenger engines, the Dickinson and the Lowry. You're going to see a picture of the Lowry steam dummies again. Holiday picnics were a huge deal in early San Diego. Any excuse for a picnic. July 4th, you can't believe July 4th. And down there on the Sweetwater branch, a little park along the river called Linwood. It's a very popular destination. So they handled the holiday picnics, and then they started running into other problems. The first derailment occurred in the Choyas Valley. Tracks at that time were 35-pound rail on the MC&O. And as you might imagine, as I started putting a little bit heavier equipment on there, we had rail spread, something that we're all too familiar with. Yeah, August 9th, they did the survey for the extensions to La Presa and down to Juana, excuse me. Up until 1916, the town at the edge of the border on the San Diego side was Tijuana. Railway rails had already been ordered because of the long delivery time in advance. Construction started on the extension to La Presa. The developers of La Presa kicked in $4,000 to get that on. Pretty much the same thing that you had to go through every time you wanted to extend a railroad someplace. Somebody had to kick in some bucks. Mid-September, the surveys were complete. Bridge by the dam, which you've seen in a lot of photographs, and you can see there's one more here. Spring Canyon Trestle, the Grand Canyon of San Diego. And they're up to 7 round trips to National City daily, 10 on Sundays. All the picnickers were out. So there's their first major locomotive. So, go, we would call it. labeled as San Miguel.
Fancy.
All of their early locomotives had number or names to start with, and later on they just turned them into numbers when they reproduced. And here we are running one of the passenger trains up the middle of National Avenue in National City. And the hotel there, the National Hotel, International Hotel, was the early place that they found rooms for the railroad workers. Later on, they built the row houses in National City. You've seen them down there near 24th Street. They're typical Eastern row houses that they put in. And here's one of the first large-scale excursions, and there's the locomotive that we talked about, A.B. Lowry, the inductor of Santa Fe official. And it's hard to tell in this, but one of those wheels is off the track. First derailment. And here again, we have all the passengers off the train lined up. Somebody had the camera with the tripod taking the picture. And here we go. And these were all too frequent. And as a result, what you got was typically they got all the passengers off the car that had derailed, and all the men would get it back up on the track, like back down, and away we go. Nice to have likely. So the balance of 1887, things continued to grow, the boom continued to expand. Carlson and Associates have bought up all of what's Ocean Beach today and started selling land out there. They paid, I believe, $4,000 for the entirety of Ocean Beach to start with. And then they saw the boom really heating up, and they said, oh, we make some money here. They sold it for $10,000. A couple of weeks later, they said, we were hasty. This thing just keeps building. They bought it back. And they started staging hot air balloon ascensions and cliff diving and all of this stuff. And they sold on paper $1 million worth of lots in Ocean Beach. At the end of the boom, when everything collapsed, it all went for tax forfeitures. And Millionaires of a Day was a book that was written by San Diego's publicists. All right, anyway, back here. Now we're hauling 1,000 passengers a day. We've doubled it. And finally starting to get some freight going. Fire we talked about up at the Fulton Locomotive Works. All these cars that were in progress burned except for the hardware, the trucks, etc. And they got that turned around very quickly. Here, everything was delivered. Pretty good workforce up there. 2 of the locomotives broke down the same day, October 31st. That's a big problem when they got 2 locomotives up there. New locomotives, the National City of Sweetwater arrived. At the end of 1887 on Coronado, uncompleted hotel, getting special excursion trains. Parts of it are functioning, just not the whole hotel. So they are accepting rooms, people that want to come out even before the hotel's done. And this company based back in the East, the Raymond Excursion Company, really brought people into San Diego in those early days. Raymond Excursions would come through on the California Southern and on the Santa Fe system with up to 20 car trains full of people from Chicago or New York. Just to want to come out here to the West Coast, they would stop in LA. Raymond Excursions that came into San Diego after the hotel was built would be routed directly out to the hotel without even stopping in San Diego, which some of them complained about because they really wanted to go to San Diego. It just became a huge deal. Every time the excursion came into town, it was like when the boat came into very early San Diego, that was the only thing happening in town. everybody came down to meet the boat. Now they're coming down to meet the train. Selling stuff. Tracks on the Coronado Railroad have reached from the hotel south, Coronado Heights, which is now basically Imperial Beach. And again, major land auctions, balloon ascensions. First one that they did was very interesting. These are hot air balloons. This daring aeronaut was going up and they didn't get the balloon apparently inflated all the way. And it didn't reach its full height. A gust of wind caught it, went over into the bay and dropped the guy down in the bay. Probably was a fabulous event. 4 trains a day on the Coronado. Track laying has begun. San Diego down to National City, so they're working on it in states. April Fool's Day, the hotel down is finally open to the public on with its 400-person bathhouse. That's pretty substantial. Track laying is very close to the connection with the NC&O, the tie-in, that would allow them to run excursions all over the double system. From the salt works, going forth from National City to National City through the slow area, 15 bridges and 1 long trestle. If you've been down there and looked at what's now the bicycle path through there, you can understand it's a challenge to build a railroad through a long swamp. That's basically what it is. The NC&O has got the line to Presa. They're almost down to Juana. Little town called Bonita, which sits about where Robb Field is now, was building at the time. They put a hotel in there. It was a very pretty little place, and then it all silted up because wave action changed, climate change. And 80 trains a day are running between San Diego and National Station. 80 trains a day. Okay, here's the top of the Sweetwater route. People are always kind of curious about that. See it now on the map. You can see it all the way back there. So they, at this point, the railroad just basically follows the south side of the Sweetwater River all the way up. You had Bonita, which is where it is today. Then you had Riverdale, Whitney's, Bonnie Bray, Sunnyside. Still is in Sunnyside on the current map.
Yep.
Then it split at this point, crossed the river, had a little spur, and right up here was U.S. Grant Jr.'s house at Aloha. And the other line stayed this side of the river, went up to the quarry to build the dam. So it split into 2. Then the north side of the river went on up past the dam and crossed this gorge up there, Spring Canyon, which is where you can see that iron trestle. There's a water pipe that goes across there today. Then it was carved out of the rock up to where the Spring Valley Swap Meet now is. And that's a hiking path you could walk on. And from the Spring Valley Swap Meet, it goes right through where their parking lot was. Then over what was just bare land around the hillside and into La Presa where they built the depot. The tracks ran a little bit past the depot. That's the corner of San Diego and Grand Avenues.
Bruce, did you put that together?
Yes.
That's a great map.
Thank you. I had a little help from Thomas for this. May 1888. Boom is still going. Sweetwater Dam is complete. Big celebration. National City had something finally to celebrate. Everybody had water to drink without a well. Wells in old San Diego were always salty and not very good drinking water. They hadn't got the flume in there yet either, bringing water to San Diego from the east. So this was cool. You actually had fresh water to drink. Coronado Railroad is finally almost big down to the heights, what they call Coronado Heights. Hourly trains at least. In a couple of different weeks, they had trains more than an hour. So between the two, again, at peak, you're running 80 trains a day. Back and forth. Both lines have announced that they're going to oil because coal has been a problem. Despite Freckles bringing in coal from Australia, there's a shortage. It's not always very good coal. Creates a lot of smoke. They can't get good anthracite. National City has experimented with many things. They started off trying to get something better than the handbrakes that they had on the cars as they got longer and longer excursion trains. So they first started with steam brakes on the locomotive. By the time they had a 5-car train, by the time the steam got back to the end of car 5, it was water. That didn't work out really well. Then they tried positive air, using air pressure to set the brakes instead of reservoirs and the Westinghouse system that they have today. So they finally settled on Westinghouse. Both lines at this point still had link and pin couplings. Very, very dangerous. And especially dangerous if you're going to do stupid things with your trains. And they did. Like on freight trains, in several circumstances, they resorted to hot switching to save time, which involves uncoupling cars, brakemen actually riding on the car, pulling the pin, letting the car go by itself into the switch that they've opened up, into the siding or spur, then reverse the locomotive and go back to where you were planning on going. Even worse, they tried it on a few occasions to save time, and they had to change locomotives. At the end of an excursion, the locomotive didn't have enough fuel to get past National City and back up to San Diego. So coming into National City, the fireman crawled out, pulled the pin, left the passenger train cars rolling down the track, accelerated the locomotive ahead into the switch into the yards, the replacement locomotive out onto the main, let the cars catch up with it, reach down, grab the link, drop the pin in while the train was moving, keep going.
Green game, right? Yeah.
Yeah, routine derailments continue, engine breakdowns. Just seem to be the expected thing of the technology that they have. And CNO finally had its first fatality. It would not be the last. Drunk waiting on the platform, kind of lost his balance. It's the train was. They also killed horses and there were lots of around. Here's the National City celebration for the dam. Water from upstream is now being sprayed up in the air there in fountains. You see the hotel way back here. Everybody that had a horse and buggy came out. Got to clean up afterwards. Wouldn't be my thing. There's one of the earliest pictures of the dam from the obviously the lake side of it. And there's the Spring Canyon Trestle. So in order to get past the dam, they had to bridge this little side canyon. And they took advantage of it and they labeled it the Grand Canyon of San Diego.
That's a home.
Advertised it. And other pictures you see of crossing, you got guys up there in the open combination car hanging out the side. Daredevils. This is up in La Presa. They're talking, the sign back there on the wagon says the new hotel is being raised soon. And they had a steam traction trailer hauling up lumber. Okay, another railroad heard from, sort of. National City streetcar line, a horse and one streetcar. Now in service, 8 blocks. It was built by an elderly gentleman who did it basically for fun. Put in the tracks and he gave free rides to all the kids. And he just had a ball with his streetcar company. And, didn't take very long before people started complaining about the erratic service was the only erratic when it felt like it.
We want it for free, right?
Well, for the kids.
Yeah.
Hard to think of it. Competition between the NCNO and the Coronado, now that they're both running, trains every half hour. And of course, resulting increase in minor accidents all over the place. 60-mile excursion finally is in place on the NCNO. So the entire system, we started off in San Diego, went down to National City, went to the dam, maybe had a picnic up there at the dam. Came back down, went down to the border, watched a prize fight or some other event down there. Came back up, went over to the Hotel Del, wandered around the grounds. Whole 60-mile excursion, basically taking the day. And the newspaper ads, ride the damn train. Prize fights were added to the horse racing and other events down in Tijuana. And they were bare knuckle fights that sometimes went 40, 50 rounds.
Oh, geez.
What they did back in those days. The judgment of the referee was final. Nobody ever argued with the referee. A guy named Wyatt Earp would come to town to run a
Ouch.
and a little minor problem.
Yeah,
NCNO locomotive number 7 on the right has just been put back up on its wheels, although not on the track. Typical of what you got in derailments on light rail and locomotives with short wheelbases. So September of 1888, things start slowing down. Both roads agree to split the daily schedule. So every half hour you got a train. One would be a Coronado train, the next would be a City and Otay train. Racing to the crossing was prohibited, and the NCNO announced that 5% employee pay guide. If there's ever a sign of a boom having run its course, there you are. 7 engines now, maximum they would ever have on the NCNO, including the express car, the totally enclosed express car. They had combinations of the open cars for nice weather and the closed coaches for the inclement weather. We got a postal contract to deliver freight all the way down to the border. They're now shipping porphyry rock for a number of applications from the Sweetwater Quarry. Passenger service, as it declines, the freight business gradually goes. Peak boom population got up to almost 40,000 people from 4,000 people back in 1880. And by the end of 1888, it started dropping. By 1889, they were down to about 13,000. There you are. This is at Olivewood on 24th Street, or in Kimball's estate. They are up at the dam. People for the picnic and Sweetwater grounds. They put a nice picnic ground. You had to walk up. Big trees they planted along the reservoir. See all the people there in the cool hats. They've obviously been down to Tijuana first. More commonly in the summer, when you had open cars, they actually put seats on flat cars. All people up there. The ladies would have their parasols to protect them from the sun. You ever been behind a coal burning locomotive going up a hill? Parasols did not pass. And here's a typical rock train. And the Mercury up. And just basically flat cars with sides, fill them all up with rock. After the end of the boom, what you call reasonable growth. Slow, steady business. Some of the equipment is retired, a lot of it's just put into storage, particularly Coronado. They had a big car barn over there, they just parked everything they weren't using and left it there for quite a while. National City Streetcar Company quit. I think the old guy died actually, just because of complaints. And Spreckle starts making big plans of his own. Now that the boom is over, he's got a chance to get a lot of land and equipment cheap. Take advantage of it while you can. So first the remedy, get rid of the old horse car company that's slow. There's a cable car company formed in San Diego as well. There's the beginnings of other electric service, San Diego Rapid Transit. That's all up in San Diego, so now I can talk about it. San Diego Electric Railway is incorporated. Inherits all the old tracks, starts laying down new tracks, starts putting up overhead, builds their powerhouse down by the Santa Fe Depot, across the street from it, where the Los Baños bathhouse used to be. South Bay railroads have become almost entirely dependent, except for San Diego to National City routine passenger business. And they're hauling all these things that have cropped up during the boom. Water, big deal. Coronado has bored wells that are still there. Well, if you follow the San Ysidro Boulevard, right near San Ysidro Boulevard, where it passes a little bit south of the salt works, there's an area there, there's a low area, and that's where the wells all were and still. Out in Spring Valley, they were hauling Isham's Water of Life. They competed with each other. The little spring in Spring Valley is still there too. It's up behind the Bancroft house. Isham was a crook. Box factory, the Otay watch factory, big deal. Short period of time. National City Reduction Works hauled in regular shipments of ore and reduced it. The excursions are being run twice a week. The Raymond excursions in the summer are arriving every week. There's the one first. A town like Otay. What the hell? Building there.
Didn't last very long. Made watches.
They made watches, pocket watches.
You can still get them every once in a while. If you look
Every once in a while, they'll show up at an auction someplace. There are not a whole lot of them made, and frankly, we're not the greatest watches in the world. But they're collectible now because there were so few of them.
You'd like to find one that works.
That was a big employer at the time. You can tell they had a lot of people. Okay, San Diego and Phoenix. 1887, the bright and smiling young man, my favorite con man of all mine, William Henry Carlson, otherwise known as Smilin' Billy. Smilin' Billy was an immigrant from Sweden, first came to San Francisco, learned very early that immigrants got short shrift on everything, and learned to speak perfect English, then came down to San Diego and told everybody he had been a page in the state Senate in Sacramento. Native-born guy, and got himself elected to the city council in San Diego, turned into the real estate business, as we said, with Ocean Beach, Then built the little railroad line from Roseville up what's now Nimitz Boulevard down into Ocean Beach. The rails were stolen from the steamship company. The ties were 6 feet apart. Remember right, the locomotive was borrowed. You had to haul it around the bay in a dredge. A lot of problems with that. His partner, Henry Higgins, was the son of a prominent local guy who got very disappointed by the end of the boom and all the things that Carlson was doing, and he committed suicide. It's a sad story. Carlson also founded Monument City right down by the border monument, which is still there as well. It's enclosed in a fence right down there in San Isidro. That was going to be another big deal. They were going to extend the spur from Oneonta all the way down to Monument City. He built railroads, over a dozen names during the time he was here. The San Diego and Eastern Terminal ran through what's now Pacific Highway out onto Roseville and serviced a nail factory out there. He had all these names: the San Diego, Del Mar, and Los Angeles Railroad, the San Diego, and there were a bunch of them. And the local newspapers made fun of them. They started, anytime they talked about them, making up these fictitious names: San Diego, New York, and East Congo. Anyway, he got elected mayor in 1894. Shows you what politics is like. He's going to build the railroad to Arizona. He'd been doing magic lantern shows, talking about the possibilities of this thing for a long time. And it would start from the Spring House near the Coronado Wells, run up the Otay Valley, went down to Mexico, and got the president of Mexico to give him a 10-mile franchise, colonize all the way east. Had all these things supposedly going for him, but he didn't have any money. And nobody wanted to give him any money. He managed to build 10 miles of it up to the Denari Vineyard. The Denari Grove is still up there. Pretty place. Got the 10 miles done and ran out of money. So he said, well, we got to do something to get money. So he had a big picnic, spent whatever money he had left on a big blowout picnic, ox roast and all of that stuff. Phoenix Day, all the railroads in town had free passes to come up and see the Phoenix, but nobody gave him any money. So his term expired and he left town eventually. He did accomplish one thing. He was actually appointed to the state Senate, and he got the initial bill passed to build the bulkhead for San Diego Harbor. Did one good thing. Later on, he and his wife were arrested in a mail fraud in Arizona and sent. And there's a one share stock certificate in the San Diego and Phoenix Railroad. And I love these two. If you're going to do a conduit, right? So we put Tom Scott's picture on it. Tom Scott was the guy who was going to build a railroad here from San Diego in the 1870s. He was actually a very respected railroad man, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and also president of the Texas
And Pacific.
Texas and Pacific. UP. And they never got to San Diego, but good railroad. Well, he had initially planned back in 1873 to build this railroad road up the Otay Valley. And he actually did a survey for it. So Carlson put Tom Scott's picture on all his stock certificates, like Tom Scott has something to do with it. Huh. All right, John Spreckles. becomes Mr. San Diego, even by this early time. And in 1901, probably his best innovation to date was Tent City. Little Tent City right there at the head of the peninsula, and electrified the Orange Avenue line from the ferry down to Tent City. This was marvelous. These huge, beautiful tents were elaborately furnished. This is where all the wealthy people went to spend their summer and enjoy the sea breeze. They put down Persian carpeting on the floors. It's not campland. February 1906, the ordinance was granted to electrify the NCNO main line from San Diego down to Tijuana, with connections to the San Diego Electric in San Diego, so you could now get on the train almost any place in San Diego. With that system, take your ride all the way down to National City initially. San Diego Electric Railway operated the line, and the Spreckels interest took over both of the South Bay railroads, but they didn't officially amalgamate them immediately. December 1907, interurban service, the Chula Vista begins, and all of the early vehicles, they didn't go out and buy electric interurbans. They took all the old coaches that were sitting around in a car barn in Coronado and turned them into electrics. Smart. Here's what you got. January 1908. They had previously incorporated a railroad that they hadn't actually done anything with, the San Diego Southern. So the San Diego Southern finally came into existence, taking over the assets of the other two railroads. And there's the San Diego Southern train headed through Tent City. I don't know who staged this photo either. I mean, the flag right there. That's great photography. Sailboats on the.
What are they standing on too? You know.
Yeah, I don't know. And they got fresh huts over there. They had this whole line of amusements and trinket shops. Full-blown tourist adventure. Finally had one major fatality on the railroad, 1905. And here are some of those early interurbans. You can see this, you can't easily, but this was just a coach. It's a basic closed coach. Stuff on it. The guy standing in front of it, when you look at pictures of this early period, you will see his face. You will see him in all kinds of pictures. You will see him as conductor on the NCNO, San Diego Southern, San Diego Southeastern, and San Diego, Arizona. He went the whole line through. Dan Armstrong is his name. He knew everybody. Everybody in San Diego knew Dan Armstrong, and he made friends with all the immigrants that came in. I helped him out. Just the nicest guy in San Diego. Here's the electric interurban line as initially laid out. I think it's beautiful. I'm up here at the terminus down Newton, 25th Street. Then out 28th Street, Grand Avenue, now Bergia Street, National Avenue, all the way down here to 24th Street. Then out, there's Hollywood, Terrace is where it makes that curve out there at the end of 24th Street. Then straight down, they put in stations, Rosebank, Frederica. Name something familiar?
Frederick Man.
Yeah, still there. Big dog leg over here, right down the middle of 3rd Avenue. Chula Vista, Center Street and Chula Vista stations, Cunningham Station, 1st Street, Melrose, 3rd, 5th, Otay, Bonita, then tie over here to the Coronado. The new company has acquired all of the assets. Some are assigned to the steam division, but still exist. And other than converted to electric. Steam division got a franchise for 50 years. Said, well, that's great. You don't have to worry about getting refranchised all the time. Not knowing that basically rail service was going to go away in a decade. Just kind of dried up because of something else you're going to see shortly. I mentioned the little landers, I guess. Something a lot of people have talked about over the years. This co-op bought land along the Tijuana River Valley and set up an agricultural commune. Every family that came in and bought into the co-op got 1 acre of farmland. And that's the name of the company, with a lot of people cooperating, each one having just a little land. We can make this thing work. And they did. They were very successful. They talked the railroad into giving them a deal to haul all their produce on Saturdays. They would accumulate produce during the week and they would haul it up to San Diego for free for these guys. Not sure how they arranged that deal. But everybody loved those people, loved their marketing. They were just nice, friendly people. That's what everybody else did. So there's that logo you were looking for, John.
There you go.
San
Super.
Diego Southern. This is obviously along a street somewhere where they're maybe expecting deliveries at their office or something. Put this thing up.
Won't change it yet.
No explanation.
Oh,
Back up,
wait,
back
wait,
up.
go back, go back.
Go back.
Thank you.
I gotta get a print.
And we're also record, this will be on our YouTube channel shortly too.
Good.
So we'll have this up there.
Oh, okay, good.
Hopefully.
We're trying to restore or
Yeah,
Rebuild.
none of the previous railroads had a logo. This is the first
All the way.
railroad down there to have a logo.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the store, the post office and general store in Sunnyside. And there's the train.
that's not the old Bonita store. Is it?
No,
That's Sunnyside.
that's further up.
Further up the hill, valley.
Yeah, so there's that little locomotive and 2 coaches. And the local people, we inherited from some anonymous source a scrapbook of a family that lived in the South Bay, and I've been trying to find out who they are. The Bonita Historical Society has put the word out asking people. We had tentative names of the people who ran the store in the post office. Haven't got any results yet. If any of you have connections down there, love to know who the people are in all these issues. There's the Bonita store. Fruit packing plant. And the train. All those babies, those coal burners really. Here's the shops and the depot that were built for the San Diego Southern by the Spreckles interests. You can see the poles there for the electric line. Thinking off buildings on the left-hand side there are the shop facilities. Blow this thing up a lot and look at it, you can see some equipment sitting back there in the yard. Then you see the steam train coach sitting over there on the right-hand side of the depot. That little tiny building there, it's actually the passenger depot. It's bigger than it looks. You're looking at engine. Okay. There were still plenty of horses around in 1907, 1910. And what horses do to streets, is something else.
Well,
You had a good pair of boots, usually if you walked around on the streets. This person has obviously met the train for some reason or other. And over here on the extreme left, the picture is the reason that business dried up on the railroad as far as passenger business was concerned. I don't know what that one is. Any car buffs out there, you can look at that.
It's the luxury special.
Maybe tell me. I know the San Diego and Southeastern own several dealers. I don't think that's a good. This is at on the other stations. So San Diego Southern had that franchise that would cost them a lot of money as time went on because nobody was riding the trains. They would have to run the trains by terms of the franchise. There would only be 2 or 3 passengers at the time. City of New Orleans before. There you go. The owners of the Cuyamaca Railroad, which was also not doing very good business, they had replaced the steam trains with the McKean cars and gas electric cars, trying to save a lot of money, and they still were losing money. They had been purchased by interests up in Los Angeles that were apparently somebody that had connections with John Spreckles, and they worked out a deal to get him a really good price on the Cuyamaca Railroad. His franchise that he had acquired from the city gave him the right to build a separate railroad line to El Cajon, and also one down to Ensenada, Mexico, which they never did either. But getting the Cuyamaca took care of that problem, and the San Diego and Southeastern was born. They also set up a trucking business. They bought up a lot of local trucking companies and set up out at Foster and hauled truck freight up to Ramona and Santa Isabel and all those other places. So they were in both businesses. All the equipment was lettered, everything had to be changed over to SE. Depots that you saw. New gas electric cars would remain on the San Diego and Arizona, numbers 41 to 43. You will see a picture of the, let me think, the coach bodies were built by somebody called Wasson. The electrics, General Electric. Anyway, this is one of those converted coaches, number 101. There's number 102. This is downtown at the depot. There's the old 1887 California Southern Depot. And there's car 41. No overhead electricity required. This one's sitting at 26th and Commercial. It's that thing that's perking up over the top of the car there is the end tower on the old Cuyamaca Depot. So these 3 cars were a substantial improvement. Hey, another railroad heard from Elisha Babcock, the guy who built the Hotel Dell and Coronado Railroad, also had partnership in this venture. Lands that had become Imperial Beach and Nestor were well south of the Coronado line, and they wanted something that they could walk down the street and get on a train. So they laid some tracks and formed the Mexico and San Diego Railroad. Edison battery cars, there were 2, they brought them out from Pennsylvania, I think. the floorboards came up at night. And all underneath the floorboard were all these big lead acid batteries. Had to be recharged, and electricity had come down there from the power plant at the Hotel Dell. They were supplying power to Imperial Beach. Well, there was another project there. A guy built a wave motor out at the end of the Imperial Beach Pier. And supposedly all these air-filled pistons that dangled down into the ocean as the waves came by, pistons would go up and down, and drive this long crankshaft that ran down the length of the pier, drove a generator, and that was supposed to power all the electrical needs for Imperial Beach. As far as we know, the only thing it ever powered was recharging the batteries. Service ended in 1916. The whole time this was on, Babcock fought with the San Diego and Southeastern because they didn't want them on their tracks. They said, these things are going to run out of juice right in the middle of the track and we're going to be in big trouble. He had court cases and everything else. So there's one of those cars. We later were brought up to San Diego and used on a feeder from the foot of 10 down to the Santa Fe Depot, which was also the Los Angeles and San Diego Beach La Jolla Line Depot. One of them was saved and sold to a guy out in Descanso. For years, it was parked on a hill and used as a feed storage shed for cattle. 1916, everybody in San Diego should know 1916. January 1916, multi-year drought. Let's hire a rainmaker. Out that field, his brother set up out there in Lake Morena, boiled up big vats of particulate matter into the upper atmosphere. And apparently, one of these rivers of water that we've been having lately came rolling in and met that nice cloud of particulates and dumped all the water right there. Atmospheric river, that's probably it raised havoc. Every canyon in San Diego was filled with water. Every bridge was washed out. You couldn't get out of San Diego except by ship. Of course, all the dirt roads, railroad tracks washed out. It was incredible. I believe 40 inches of rain in one continuous stretch. Not the rainiest year on record, 1916. All the rain happened in January, and then it was almost dry the rest of the year. It's not even in the top 10, but damage it did was incredible. As you see on here. San Diego and Arizona construction also badly damaged. John Spreckles, being the guy in charge, was asked, what are we going to do? And he said, "Put back." So they mostly did. They put back all the San Diego and Arizona, but they did not do that with the San Diego Southeastern. So here's a rare photograph that shows two river lines at the same time. San Diego and Arizona is on its way south across that bridge, and all the fill is washed out. And underneath it, coming in there from the left, is the San Diego Southeastern track headed down to the border. Wow. One of those early electrics that they had redone became car 111 on the San Diego Southeastern. It was parked on one of the trestles across the Sweetwater River in hopes that it would hold it in place against the flood. Good work.
Well, they picked the crummiest one.
Here's the Sweetwater Valley.
That Armstrong again? Like, where's Waldo?
Oh, look at that. We have a scrapbook in our file that the railroad put together. It's small pictures. Really. So, what are you going to do? Well, they did studies, they made maps, got some really nice colored maps that show what's going to get abandoned and what isn't. Future agricultural plans, all kinds of things from the 1960s. But one steam railroad line seemed to be able to do the job. In 1916, they determined that was going to be the San Diego and Arizona, where they already had a lot of money invested. It was nice new track and it was up to date. So the old stuff was mostly going to go away. Coronado branch was rebuilt substantially to maintain the electric service and some freight service, mostly North Island, where they were doing airplanes by that time. That lasted until at least the 1970s. Chula Vista 3rd Street line was abandoned in 1960s. You can't have that railroad in the middle of the thing holding up traffic. Interurban service continued on through the 1920s, but by the end of the 1920s, gone. There's the post-1916 model. So we start out pretty much the same, Newton, Grand Avenue, Dalvergia, 12th over. But then when you get down here, where it used to go out 24th Street, now it's just the old Coronado line. Down to Potash Junction, which we should mention. By this period in time, the Hercules Powder Company had been established out there at a little point to make gunpowder out of kelp. And it worked very well. It's essential for World War I. And a big business. They extended a spur down there eventually on San Diego Electric, right into the plant. But anyway, yeah, the interurban line then moved over into Chula Vista, down and terminated in Chula Vista, where all the packing houses and things used to be. K Street. And there was a crossover that's illustrated here at F Street. That diamond was there for quite a while, flying across the SD&A. There were some businesses out there on F.
That's that funky curve by the Chula Vista Police Department behind it, where the apartments kind of go to the curve.
Yeah, interesting area. There had been a railroad out on Point Loma that's not South Bay, so we didn't talk about that either. That was set up by the real estate guy that wanted to sell property out there. And property purchased that, and when it was transferred over to the San Diego Electric, they brought the Point Loma cars down and ran them on the South Bay Interurban as well. They were more substantial cars. Metal made by Brill back in St. Louis. That pretty much brings us up to where we're going to stop. We will entertain questions.
I think there's some.
Yeah, let me see what we got in the chat here. So I wrote a novel here. Let's see. All right, so we're just making a comment here, San Diego Cable Railway Company.
Yes. They existed, but they weren't in the South Bays.
Yeah, probably a question as to what it was. That a lot of people don't realize we had a cable.
Yeah, the cable car company, for the benefit of Vernon and anybody else out there, ran from downtown San Diego, Market Street, up 4th Avenue to 4th and Redwood, then over onto 6th, out 6th Street, up to Park Boulevard, and then up to Adams Avenue
Wow.
and the park up at Adams Avenue that was built by the Spreckles interest. Or would be after the cable company folded. Cable cars, for those not familiar, a subterranean track is laid and a cable run is made beneath the street. It's accessed, there's actually a slot in the street all the way the length of the cable company. And the car has a pincer grip that's hand operated from the cab inside the car. And the motorman uses that basically to reach down and grab onto the cable. Cable is attached to drums. Power end of it is up at the top of the hill, and there's a drum down at the lower end of it. It just continuously revolves, big steel cable. So you latch onto the cable and you tow the car up. When you get to the spot where there's a break, you're at a level place, unlock from that cable, and you grab onto the other cable that takes you up to the next place. San Francisco has those lots.
Weren't we the second company in California?
Yeah, second one in California to install a cable car system. Top speed was about 6 miles an hour. Kids in town used to have a ball with it. They would sneak out in the morning. They shut it down at night. And before it started up in the daytime, they would get string and tie boxes and stuff onto the cable. All stuff up the street. Kids just find, threw sparks at the trolley wire, stones at the trolley wires too to make sparks. We had a lot of fun. The cable car company only lasted a little over 2 years and was replaced with an electric outfit called Citizens Traction,
Till I needed
which was then bought by Spreckles and merged into San Diego Electric. So not very successful here in San Diego. It just was running just about even. The cable car company was underwritten by the San Diego National Bank, and the two guys that owned the bank, Collins and Dee Deer, absconded with all the money. So that put the cable car company out of business.
I thought because they had to replace the cable finally.
They had a hard time replacing that cable too. It was very expensive. Okay, so what else we got here?
Right, looks like just kind of wrote some history on different pieces of equipment here.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into all the details of the equipment. Obviously, you have done that.
I think you found a new volunteer for the library, Bruce.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
You know all these words?
Yeah. We've got a very nice treatise on the cable car company that Dick Dodge put together long ago, with pictures and diagrams. In our library collection of artifacts, we have one of the yokes that supported the cable underneath the street. There's a long story as to how we got it.
We got a small section of the cable.
Yes, we have a little 1.5 foot of the cable.
Bruce, what'd you say the cross street was on the cable car? It was Adams and.
Oh, the powerhouse was at Redwood, 4th and Redwood. Yeah, and then the other drum was all the way up at the top at what became Mission Cliff Gardens.
That was the end of the chat messages there.
Oh, okay. So we're down to the house, Mr. Bill.
That little town down south, Bonita.
Bonita, named after a little town in New York with the same name. What happened to it? It silted up. It was located on kind of a little isthmus waterway estuary that came up from the ocean down there where the Tijuana or the Tijuana estuary is now. And it was navigable. And then they had a big storm and waves brought loads of sand in off the ocean and silted it all up. And so the town just kind of dried up and went away. Yes, Jason?
There's the book titled Rails of the Silver Gate. And you mentioned a ferry named the Silver Gate. What is the Silver Gate? Is that a nickname or something for town or?
Yeah, it's kind of a nickname for the entrance to the harbor, passing through the Silver Gate. San Francisco had their Golden Gate, so we had to have a Silver Gate. Yeah,
You know, there was no silver down here, was it?
yeah, silver down.
Only in your fillings.
There were quite a series of ferries. That's another book in itself, the whole history of the Coronado Ferry Company. We rode them when I came here to San Diego in the Navy back in the 60s. They were all still running. Nickel Snatcher for people. Yeah.
I did too, sorry. I wrote that too.
All right, yeah. Took my car over there sometimes on the car ferry, and they built that bridge. They still have a ferry running today, do they not?
Yes.
I've done that a long time.
We were on there and they were delivering pizzas from Coronado Brewing Company to someplace downtown. Yeah, had about 24 pizzas on it.
Wow,
Yeah.
full enterprise.
Fairings.
Anybody else?
Tijuana.
Tijuana. Yes, where San Isidro is now. 1916 flood basically washed it all away. I think there were 3 buildings left and they moved them across the border. Then there was nothing much there. Up the track a little ways, a guy named Lane had a store. And there was the customs house and some of that had to be rebuilt as well. And then they incorporated San Isidro some years later. That grew up around the border. Yeah. No more Tijuana. Kingston Trio got it all wrong. They screwed everybody up. Thinking Tijuana jail. But they meant the Tijuana jail, but it didn't stand as well.
Bruce, along, remember that it's Gunnery Point, that's part of the park out there. Well, the rail runs up and down there. And my son and I walked from there to National City Depot. Is anything left of that rail now?
Yeah. There are still, well, let's see, that particular point. There might be a little bit of that. It used to be on Cleveland Avenue. I'm not sure if they pulled.
No, they pulled it. There's a segment that runs through the hotel.
Oh, yeah, south of 24.
Yeah.
There's a little bit that runs through the cement plant. Just north of Harbor Drive.
Yeah.
North of Harbor Drive is where the old line used to go.
Yeah, teeny bits and pieces.
Yeah.
The story I heard was that the walk trail, riding bike trail and everything.
Yeah.
Is just paved over the rail that's still in the ground, isn't it?
Yeah, parts of the new bike trail are paved over. Parts of it were beside tracks.
Yeah, there's rail land down there near Florida Street. There's about 80 feet of rail or maybe 160 feet of rail land just right next to the bicycle lane. In the weeds, you'll see it.
You'll get down around J Street. There's huge trees coming up through the track.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're not gonna run anything over.
Chainsaws, about it.
There was a big push in the 80s to keep that line alive and run dinner trains on it.
Yeah, it would have been
It
fun.
didn't happen. Anybody else?
Where was Denari Vineyard?
Mary Vineyard is, again, about 10 miles up on the south side of the river, the Otay River. From the Well, basically San Isidro Boulevard, if you start there and well, you'll see this big grove of eucalyptus trees.
Okay.
That's where the vineyard was.
Okay.
Anybody else? That's it. Thank you all for.
Thank you.